Rosa Martinez pushed her cleaning cart down the long hallway of the Grand Plaza Hotel, just like she had done every morning for the past 8 years. The wheels squeaked slightly as they rolled over the thick carpet, and the familiar smell of lemon cleaner filled the air. She knew this place like the back of her hand. Every regular guest, every room quirk, every stain that came back no matter how hard she scrubbed. But there was something about the man in room 314 that just didn't sit right with her. His name was Jonathan Blake, according to the guest registry. He'd been staying at the hotel for 3 months now, which wasn't unusual. The Grand Plaza often hosted business travelers who needed extended stays. What was unusual was everything else about him. Rosa first noticed him on a Tuesday morning in late September. She was cleaning room 312 when she heard the elevator ding. Through the crack in the door, she watched a tall, thin man walk down the hallway. He moved quietly, almost like he was floating. His dark suit looked expensive but worn, like he'd been wearing it for days. He carried only a single leather briefcase, nothing else. That was strange thing number one. Most guests, especially long-term ones, arrived with suitcases, garment bags, maybe a laptop case. This man had just that one briefcase, and he held it like it contained the crown jewels. The next morning, Rosa knocked on room 314 to clean it. When Mr. Blake opened the door, she was struck by how pale he looked. Not sick pale, but like someone who hadn't seen sunlight in months. His hair was perfectly combed, his clothes wrinkle-free, but his eyes looked tired. Really tired. "Good morning," she said with her usual friendly smile. "Time for housekeeping." He nodded and stepped aside without a word. Most guests would say something, ask her to come back later, or make small talk about the weather. Mr. Blake just moved to the window and stood there, looking out at the city below. Rosa went about her work, but she couldn't help noticing things. The bed was made perfectly, like no one had slept in it. The corners were so tight you could bounce a quarter off them. She'd been making beds for 8 years and she knew what a slept-in bed looked like, even when guests tried to make it themselves. This bed looked like it had never been touched. The bathroom was spotless, too. The towels hung exactly where she'd left them the day before. The soap was in the same position. Even the toilet paper was folded in the little triangle she always made. It was like Mr. Blake had spent the night somewhere else entirely. But the weirdest thing was how he positioned that briefcase. Every day it sat on the small desk by the window at exactly the same angle. Rosa had an eye for details, and she could tell the case was always placed with mathematical precision. The corner lined up with the edge of a book that was also always in the same spot. After the first week, Rosa mentioned Mr. Blake to Carmen, her supervisor. "That man in 314 is a bit odd," she said during their coffee break. Carmen looked up from her paperwork. "Odd how?" "I don't think he sleeps there. And he never talks, never asks for anything. Most long-term guests at least request extra towels or want the mini fridge stocked differently." Carmen's expression changed. She set down her coffee cup and looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "Mrs. Patterson gave specific instructions about Mr. Blake," she said quietly. Mrs. Patterson was the hotel manager, a no-nonsense woman who ran the Grand Plaza like a military operation. "We're supposed to give him special attention and not ask questions." "What kind of special attention?" "The kind where we do our job and mind our own business," Carmen said firmly. "Just clean his room and move on." But Rosa couldn't move on. Something about Mr. Blake bothered her, and it wasn't just professional curiosity. There was something in the way he watched her work, like he was studying her movements. He never seemed threatening exactly, but there was an intensity to him that made her nervous. During the second week, Rosa started paying closer attention to his routine. Mr. Blake left his room every morning at exactly 9:15. She knew this because she always cleaned the rooms on the south side of the building first, and she'd see him walk past the window at the end of the hall. He'd return around 2:30 in the afternoon, sometimes carrying a newspaper or a coffee cup, but never shopping bags or takeout food. The strange part was what happened in the evenings. Rosa sometimes worked late shifts to cover for other staff, and she'd noticed that the light in room 314 stayed on all night. Not just a lamp left on by accident, but a bright light that suggested someone was awake and active. One evening, she was cleaning the hallway around 11 p.m. when she heard talking coming from his room. It wasn't the TV, she was sure of that. It sounded like a phone conversation, but the voice was so quiet she couldn't make out any words. Just a low murmur that went on for hours. The next morning, she found Mr. Blake standing by the window again, but this time he looked even more tired than usual. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually perfect posture had a slight slump to it. "Long night?" she asked, trying to make conversation. He turned to look at her, and for a moment she thought she saw something flash in his eyes. Surprise, annoyance? It was gone so quickly she wasn't sure. "I'm a light sleeper," he said. His voice was soft but clear, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. It was the first time he'd spoken more than a greeting to her, and Rosa felt a little thrill of progress. Maybe he was just shy. "The city can be noisy," she agreed, fluffing the pillows that clearly hadn't been used. "I've got some earplugs if you'd like them." "That's very kind, but I'm fine," he said, turning back to the window. And that was it. The conversation was over, and Rosa went back to cleaning. But she kept thinking about that moment. There had been something in his tone, something that suggested he wasn't fine at all. He seemed like a man carrying a heavy burden, and Rosa's maternal instincts kicked in. She'd raised 3 kids on her own, and she knew what stress looked like. Over the next few days, she tried small acts of kindness. She left extra coffee packets in his room. She made sure his towels were the fluffiest ones from the laundry. She even left a small plant on his windowsill, thinking it might brighten up the space. Mr. Blake never acknowledged these gestures, but she noticed he didn't throw the plant away either. In fact, he seemed to position it carefully next to his briefcase, like it was part of his precise arrangement. By the end of the 3rd week, Rosa had developed a theory. Mr. Blake was probably going through a divorce or dealing with some kind of family crisis. That would explain the long-term stay, the sleepless nights, and the general air of sadness that seemed to follow him around. She'd seen it before with other guests who were escaping complicated situations at home. The theory made her feel better about his strange behavior, and she decided to be extra patient with him. Everyone deserved kindness, especially when they were going through difficult times. She had no idea how wrong she was about Jonathan Blake, or how much danger she was walking into every morning when she knocked on the door of room 314. The first truly unsettling thing Rosa noticed was the photographs. It was a Thursday morning, about 6 weeks into Mr. Blake's stay. She'd knocked on room 314 and received his usual quiet, "Come in." When she entered with her cleaning supplies, he was sitting at the desk with his briefcase open. She caught just a glimpse of what was inside before he quickly snapped it shut, but it was enough to make her stomach drop. Photographs. Lots of them, black and white like surveillance pictures. She'd only seen them for a split second, but she was sure she'd recognized at least one face. Mr. Blake stood up quickly, grabbing the briefcase. "I'll step out while you clean," he said, which was unusual. Normally, he just moved to the window and watched the street. "No problem," Rosa managed to say, but her hands were shaking slightly as she started dusting. As soon as he left, she found herself staring at the desk where the briefcase had been. What kind of business required surveillance photos? And why had that one face looked so familiar? It bothered her all day. That evening, she was watching the local news with her daughter when it hit her. The face she'd recognized belonged to a wealthy businessman who'd been staying at the hotel just 2 weeks earlier. He'd been all over the news because his company had just been awarded a major city contract. Mr. Williamson, she thought his name was. He'd stayed in the penthouse suite and had been very demanding about his privacy. But why would Mr. Blake have his photograph? The next morning, Rosa approached room 314 with more caution than usual. She listened at the door before knocking and heard that same quiet murmuring she'd noticed before. This time, though, she caught a few words. "Target confirmed," she heard through the door. "Timeline remains the same. Target, timeline." Rosa's heart started beating faster. She knocked quickly, not wanting to be caught listening. When Mr. Blake opened the door, he looked different. More alert, more focused. His usually tired eyes were sharp and intense. "You're early today," he observed. Rosa glanced at her watch. She was actually right on time, which meant he'd been tracking her schedule more carefully than she'd realized. "Same time as always," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He studied her for a moment, then stepped aside to let her in. But this time, instead of going to the window, he stayed close. Too close. Rosa felt his eyes on her as she worked, watching every movement she made. The briefcase was closed and positioned at that same precise angle, but now she noticed other things. The book next to it wasn't just any book. It was a detailed street map of the city, with several pages bookmarked. There were small red marks visible along the edges of the pages, like someone had been marking specific locations. Rosa tried to focus on her cleaning, but her hands kept trembling. When she bent down to vacuum under the bed, she noticed something that made her freeze. There were papers scattered on the floor, like they'd fallen from the desk. Before she could stop herself, she glanced at them. More photographs. More faces she thought she recognized. And what looked like floor plans. Did you drop something? Mr. Blake's voice came from directly behind her. Rosa jumped, accidentally kicking one of the papers further under the bed. Just cleaning under here, she stammered. He crouched down next to her and she could smell his cologne. It was expensive, but there was something else underneath it. Something chemical, like the cleaning supplies she used, but sharper. Mr. Blake reached under the bed and collected the papers with quick, efficient movements. As he did, Rosa saw more details. The floor plans looked like they were of the hotel itself. Her hotel. There were red circles around certain rooms, and what looked like notes written in a language she didn't recognize. "Careful with the vacuum," he said quietly. "Wouldn't want you to damage anything important." The way he said important made Rosa's skin crawl. It sounded like a warning. For the rest of that week, Rosa found herself dreading her visits to room 314. Mr. Blake's behavior became increasingly strange. He started asking questions about her schedule, about other staff members, about which guests were staying on which floors. "That penthouse suite," he said one morning. "It's been empty lately, hasn't it?" Rosa felt a chill run down her spine. The penthouse was never empty for long. It was the hotel's most expensive room, and wealthy guests booked it months in advance. I don't really keep track of the upper floors," she lied. "Of course not," he said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe her. The questions got more specific. He wanted to know about the service elevators, about the staff schedules, about the security cameras in the hallways. He asked casually, like he was just making conversation. But Rosa wasn't fooled anymore. She started paying attention to things she'd never noticed before, like how Mr. Blake always seemed to know when other guests were coming and going. He'd position himself by the window at just the right times to watch them leave or return. And she noticed that his business trips during the day seemed to coincide with when certain wealthy guests were out of the hotel. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Rosa was running late because her daughter had been sick, and she rushed to room 314 without her usual careful listening at the door. She knocked and entered when she heard, "Come in." But the voice sounded different. Distracted. Mr. Blake was at the desk with his briefcase open and papers spread everywhere. This time he didn't have a chance to hide anything. Rosa saw it all. Photographs of hotel guests, detailed floor plans of every level, what looked like security schedules, and pages of handwritten notes. But what made her blood run cold was a large photograph in the center of it all. It was Mrs. Patterson, the hotel manager. In the photo, she was getting into her car outside her house. Someone had been watching her, following her, photographing her away from work. But the most terrifying thing was the red X marked across her face. Mr. Blake looked up and saw Rosa staring. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then very slowly he began gathering the papers. "You're early," he said, his voice completely calm. Rosa couldn't speak. She stood frozen in the doorway, her cleaning supplies clutched in her hands like weapons. "Perhaps you could come back later," Mr. Blake continued, still collecting the papers with methodical precision. "I'm in the middle of some important work." Rosa nodded quickly and backed out of the room, pulling the door shut behind her. She stood in the hallway for several minutes, trying to catch her breath and figure out what to do. She thought about calling the police. But what would she tell them? That a hotel guest had photographs and maps? That didn't sound like enough to get anyone arrested. And what if she was wrong? What if there was an innocent explanation? But deep down, Rosa knew there was nothing innocent about what she'd seen. The red X over Mrs. Patterson's face, the floor plans, the surveillance photos, the strange questions about security and schedules. It all added up to something terrible. That afternoon, she found herself watching Mr. Blake more carefully when he left for his daily trip. She positioned herself by the window at the end of the hall and saw him get into a dark sedan with tinted windows. There was someone else in the car, someone she couldn't see clearly, but she was sure it wasn't a taxi or rideshare. When he returned 3 hours later, he was carrying a new briefcase. A larger one. Rosa realized that whatever Mr. Blake was planning, it was getting closer to happening. And she was the only person who knew about it. That night, she lay awake thinking about Mrs. Patterson's kind face marked with that red X. She thought about all the wealthy guests who'd stayed at the hotel recently, and whether their faces were in those photographs too. By morning, Rosa had made a decision. She was going to figure out exactly what Jonathan Blake was planning, and she was going to stop it. She had no idea how dangerous that decision would turn out to be. Rosa had never been so nervous about going to work in her entire life. It was Thursday morning, exactly 2 months since Jonathan Blake had first checked into room 314. Rosa had spent the previous night planning her approach. She needed to get concrete evidence of whatever he was planning, something solid enough to take to the police. She decided to arrive earlier than usual, hoping to catch him off guard again. The hotel was quiet at 6:30 a.m., with most guests still asleep and only the night security guard at the front desk. Rosa's footsteps were muffled by the thick carpet as she made her way to the 3rd floor. As she approached room 314, she could hear voices inside. Not just Mr. Blake's quiet murmur, but at least 2 other people. Rosa's heart started pounding, but she forced herself to stay calm. This could be the breakthrough she needed. She pressed her ear to the door, trying to make out what they were saying. The voices were too quiet, but she could tell they were having an intense discussion. One voice sounded urgent, almost angry. Rosa pulled out her master key card, the one that gave her access to every room in the hotel. Her hands were trembling as she held it near the door sensor. What she was about to do could get her fired or worse. But she thought about Mrs. Patterson's face with that red X, and she knew she had to try. The key card beeped softly, and the lock clicked open. Rosa pushed the door just a crack, enough to see and hear, but hopefully not enough to be noticed. What she saw made her stomach drop to the floor. Mr. Blake was standing at the desk with 2 other men. One was tall and muscular, wearing all black. The other was shorter, with gray hair and expensive clothes. They were looking at photographs spread across the desk, but these weren't the surveillance photos Rosa had seen before. These were detailed pictures of the hotel's interior, the lobby, the elevators, the penthouse level, even the staff areas. "The charity gala is tomorrow night," the gray-haired man was saying. "The target will be in the penthouse suite from 8 p.m. until at least midnight. Security will be focused on the event downstairs. Target." There was that word again. Mr. Blake nodded and pointed to one of the photographs. "The service elevator provides direct access to the penthouse level without going through the main lobby. My contact on the inside has confirmed the security rotation schedule." Contact on the inside? Rosa felt sick. Someone who worked at the hotel was helping them. "What about the cameras?" the man in black asked. "Taken care of," Mr. Blake replied. "They've been malfunctioning on the 3rd floor for weeks. Tomorrow night we'll have a similar technical issue on the penthouse level." Rosa remembered the broken cameras. Everyone had assumed it was just old equipment, but now she realized it had been sabotage. The gray-haired man pulled out a folder and placed it on the desk. "Here are the final details. The target is bringing the Marchetti collection to show potential buyers. 15 pieces, worth approximately $20 million. Rosa had to cover her mouth to keep from gasping. $20 million. They were planning some kind of art theft during tomorrow night's charity gala. "The target trusts the hotel's security," Mr. Blake continued. "He's done business here before with no problems. He won't expect anything to happen in such a public venue." "And our exit strategy?" the man in black asked. Mr. Blake spread out what looked like building blueprints. "The service tunnels connect to the parking garage. We'll have a vehicle waiting in space B47. From there, it's a straight shot to the harbor." Rosa was trying to memorize every detail when disaster struck. Her cleaning cart, which she'd left in the hallway, started rolling. The wheels squeaked loudly as it moved across the carpet, bumping into the wall with a soft thud. The conversation in room 314 stopped immediately. "What was that?" the gray-haired man hissed. Rosa's blood turned to ice. She pulled the door shut as quietly as possible and grabbed her cart, but she knew it was too late. Heavy footsteps were approaching the door from inside the room. She pushed the cart as fast as she could toward the service elevator, but she wasn't quick enough. Behind her, she heard the door to room 314 open. "Hey," Mr. Blake's voice echoed down the hallway. Rosa didn't turn around. She punched the elevator button frantically, praying it would arrive before they caught up to her. The elevator seemed to take forever, but finally the doors opened. She shoved her cart inside and hit the button for the ground floor. As the doors started to close, she saw Mr. Blake running down the hallway toward her. Their eyes met for a split second, and Rosa saw something in his expression that terrified her. It wasn't just anger or surprise. It was calculation. He was already figuring out what to do about her. The elevator doors closed just as he reached them. Rosa leaned against the back wall, breathing heavily. Her mind was racing with everything she'd heard. Tomorrow night, $20 million in art, the penthouse suite, someone on the inside helping them. She had to call the police. But first she needed to get somewhere safe. The elevator reached the ground floor and Rosa quickly pushed her cart toward the staff break room. It was empty at this early hour, which was exactly what she needed. She pulled out her cell phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report a planned robbery, Rosa said, trying to keep her voice steady. At the Grand Plaza Hotel, tomorrow night during the charity gala. Ma'am, can you please slow down and give me more details? Rosa took a deep breath and started explaining everything she'd seen and heard. The 911 operator asked a lot of questions, and Rosa realized how crazy her story sounded. A hotel maid overhearing thieves planning a $20 million art heist. It seemed like something from a movie. We'll send an officer to take your statement, the operator finally said. Please stay where you are. Rosa hung up and sat down at one of the plastic break room chairs. She'd done it. She'd reported the crime. But instead of feeling relieved, she felt more scared than ever. What if the police didn't believe her? What if they thought she was making it up? And what if Mr. Blake and his partners realized she'd overheard them? 20 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. Officer Martinez was young and skeptical, while Officer Thompson was older and seemed more willing to listen. Rosa told them everything again, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. Did you get any photographs or recordings of this conversation? Officer Martinez asked. No, I was too scared to think about that. And you said there's someone on the inside helping them. Do you have any idea who? Rosa shook her head. But they knew about the security cameras, about the schedules. It has to be someone with access to that information. Officer Thompson wrote everything down carefully. We'll look into this, Ms. Martinez. In the meantime, I'd suggest you avoid contact with this Mr. Blake. What about tomorrow night? The gala? If there's really a planned theft, we'll be ready, Officer Martinez said. But ma'am, we need more than just overheard conversations to make arrests. Rosa felt frustrated and scared. She'd risked everything to report this crime, and they were treating her like she might be imagining things. After the officers left, Rosa tried to go about her normal routine, but it was impossible. Every time she saw a guest in a dark suit, her heart started racing. Every unexpected sound made her jump. Around noon, she was cleaning on the second floor when Carmen, her supervisor, approached her with a serious expression. Rosa, I need to talk to you, Carmen said quietly. Mrs. Patterson wants to see you in her office. Rosa's blood went cold. Mrs. Patterson, the hotel manager, the woman whose photograph had been marked with a red X. Did she say what it was about? Rosa asked. Carmen shook her head, but her expression was worried. She just said it was urgent. As Rosa walked toward Mrs. Patterson's office, her mind was spinning. Had Mr. Blake reported her for entering his room? Did Mrs. Patterson know about the planned theft? Or worse, was Mrs. Patterson the inside contact helping the thieves? Rosa realized she was walking into a situation where she didn't know who to trust. All she knew was that tomorrow night during the charity gala, $20 million worth of art was going to be stolen. And somehow, she'd become the only thing standing between the thieves and their target. Mrs. Patterson's office felt smaller than usual as Rosa sat in the chair across from her desk. The hotel manager was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She'd always been fair to Rosa, but right now her expression was unreadable. Rosa, Mrs. Patterson began, I understand you've been having some concerns about one of our guests. Rosa's heart started pounding. How did she know? Had Mr. Blake complained about her entering his room? Or had the police contacted the hotel already? I'm not sure what you mean, Rosa said carefully. Mrs. Patterson leaned forward. Mr. Blake, in room 314, he mentioned that you seemed interested in his business affairs. Rosa felt trapped. She couldn't tell Mrs. Patterson about what she'd overheard. without revealing that she'd used her master key to spy on a guest. That would definitely get her fired and maybe arrested. "I just do my job," Rosa said. "Clean his room, change the towels, that's all." "I'm sure that's true," Mrs. Patterson said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "However, Mr. Blake is a very important guest. He's requested that we assign a different housekeeper to his room." Rosa felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief because she wouldn't have to face Mr. Blake anymore, but terror because this meant he was definitely suspicious of her. "Of course," Rosa managed. "Whatever the guest prefers." Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment. "Rosa, you've been a good employee for 8 years. I'd hate to see you get into any kind of trouble. Sometimes it's best to focus on our own responsibilities and not worry about things that don't concern us." It sounded like a warning. Rosa nodded and left the office, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Patterson knew more than she was letting on. For the rest of that day, Rosa tried to act normal, but everything felt different. She kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see Mr. Blake or one of his associates watching her. When she cleaned rooms on the 3rd floor, she avoided even looking in the direction of room 314. That evening, Rosa's daughter noticed she was upset. "Mama, you look worried," Lucia said over dinner. "Is everything okay at work?" Rosa wanted to tell her everything, but how could she explain that she'd stumbled into what seemed like a major crime plot? Instead, she just said she was tired, but that night Rosa barely slept. She kept thinking about the charity gala happening the next evening, and about $20 million worth of art that was going to be stolen. The police had said they would look into it, but what if they didn't take her seriously? What if they thought she was just an over-imaginative cleaning lady? Friday morning brought new fears. Rosa arrived at work to find a small envelope slipped under her locker door. Her name was written on it in neat handwriting. Inside was a photograph. It was a picture of Rosa herself taken from outside the hotel. She was walking to her car in the employee parking lot, completely unaware that someone was watching her. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Some things are better left alone." Rosa's hands shook as she stared at the image. They were watching her. They knew where she worked, where she parked, probably where she lived. The message was clear: keep quiet or face the consequences. She thought about calling the police again, but what would she tell them? That someone had left her a threatening photograph? They'd probably say it wasn't enough evidence to do anything. Rosa tried to go about her work normally, but she felt eyes on her everywhere she went. When she was cleaning on the 2nd floor, she saw a man in a dark suit watching her from the end of the hallway. When she looked again, he was gone. During her lunch break, she found another envelope in her locker. This one contained a newspaper clipping about a woman who had disappeared after witnessing something she shouldn't have. The article was from a newspaper in another city, dated 3 months ago. Rosa was really scared now. These people weren't just planning a theft. They were willing to hurt anyone who got in their way. That afternoon, she was cleaning a room on the 4th floor when her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Your daughter is very pretty. It would be a shame if something happened to her." Rosa dropped her phone and it clattered on the bathroom floor. They were threatening Lucia, her 16-year-old daughter who had nothing to do with any of this. Rosa called Lucia immediately. "Mama, why are you calling?" "I'm in class." "I just wanted to hear your voice," Rosa said, trying not to sound panicked. "Are you okay? Is everything normal at school?" "Yeah, everything's fine." "Mama, you're scaring me." "What's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart. I'll see you tonight. I love you." Rosa hung up and sat on the edge of the bathtub, trying to think. She couldn't go to the police now, not when they were threatening her daughter. But she couldn't just let them steal $20 million either. That evening, Rosa drove home by a different route, checking her mirrors constantly to see if anyone was following her. She made Lucia promise not to leave the house, telling her she was worried about crime in the neighborhood. "But Mama, I'm supposed to go to Sophia's house to study for our history test." "Not tonight," Rosa said firmly. "Stay home, please." Rosa spent the evening pacing around their small apartment, looking out the windows, checking the locks on the doors. She felt like a prisoner in her own home. But as the night went on, her fear began to turn into anger. These criminals thought they could intimidate her into staying quiet while they robbed innocent people. They thought they could threaten her daughter and get away with it. Rosa thought about all the wealthy guests who stayed at the hotel, trusting that their valuables would be safe. She thought about Mrs. Patterson, who might be in danger whether she was involved or not. She thought about her own job and the jobs of all her coworkers, and how a major theft at the hotel could ruin the business. By morning, Rosa had made a decision. She wasn't going to let them win. She couldn't go to the police, but that didn't mean she was helpless. She knew the hotel better than anyone. She knew every hallway, every service elevator, every exit. If the thieves were planning to use the charity gala as cover for their crime, then she would be there to stop them. Rosa called in sick to work that Saturday, but she wasn't planning to stay home. She was planning to return to the hotel that evening during the gala and catch the thieves in the act. She would get the evidence the police needed, no matter how dangerous it might be. As Rosa prepared for what could be the most dangerous night of her life, she had no idea that everything she thought she knew about Jonathan Blake and his plan was completely wrong. The truth was far more complex and surprising than she could have ever imagined. But first, she had to survive the night. The Grand Plaza Hotel looked magnificent on the night of the charity gala. Rosa sat in her car across the street, watching wealthy guests in expensive evening wear walk through the sparkling lobby. She'd never seen the hotel like this, all lit up with special decorations and red carpet leading from the street to the entrance. But Rosa wasn't here to admire the decorations. She was here to stop a $20 million theft. She'd spent the afternoon planning her approach. The thieves expected the hotel staff to be busy with the gala, which would give Rosa the perfect cover. She had her employee ID card, her master key, and a small digital camera she'd borrowed from Lucia. Her plan was simple. Get photographic evidence of the theft in progress, then call the police. Rosa waited until 8:30 p.m., when the gala would be in full swing, before entering through the employee entrance. The hallways were quieter than usual, with most of the staff working the event downstairs. Rosa made her way to the service elevator, her heart pounding with every step. The elevator seemed to take forever to reach the penthouse level. When the doors opened, Rosa found herself in a dimly lit hallway she rarely visited. The penthouse suite was at the end of the hall, and she could see light coming from under the door. Rosa crept closer, trying to stay in the shadows. She could hear voices inside, but they were too quiet to make out clearly. She positioned herself behind a decorative column where she could see the door, but hopefully stay hidden. At exactly 9:15 p.m., she heard the elevator ding. Rosa pressed herself against the column as footsteps approached. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, Mr. Blake and his 2 associates from the morning she'd overheard them planning. But something was wrong. Instead of heading toward the penthouse suite, they stopped in the middle of the hallway. Mr. Blake pulled out what looked like a small device and spoke into it quietly. "Team 2, are you in position?" he said. "Team 2? Rosa hadn't heard anything about a Team 2 in their original conversation. "Confirmed," came a voice through the device. "Subjects are secured in the service elevator." Subjects? Rosa was completely confused. This didn't sound like the art theft she'd expected. Then, to her complete shock, Mr. Blake pulled out what was clearly a police badge. "This is Agent Harrison."
"DA, we are go for Operation Blackbird." Rosa felt like the world had tilted sideways.
"Agent Harrison, DEA?" Mr. Blake was a federal agent? What happened next made even less sense. Instead of breaking into the penthouse suite, Agent Harrison and his team took positions around the hallway like they were waiting for something. One of them had what looked like professional surveillance equipment. Rosa heard the elevator ding again, and this time 4 men in expensive suits emerged. But these weren't more law enforcement officers. Rosa could tell immediately that these men were dangerous. They moved like predators, and she could see bulges under their jackets that suggested weapons. One of them was carrying a large briefcase, and Rosa realized with growing shock that these must be the real thieves, the ones Agent Harrison and his team were waiting to catch. "The penthouse is clear," one of the newcomers said quietly. "Target is inside with the collection." Rosa watched in amazement as the real criminals approached the penthouse door. They had sophisticated equipment too, including something that looked like it could override electronic locks. But before they could use it, Agent Harrison's voice rang out. "Federal agents, nobody move." What followed was like something from an action movie. The criminals scattered in different directions, but Agent Harrison's team was ready for them. Rosa saw one suspect tackled to the ground near the elevator, while another was cornered by the stairway. In the chaos, Rosa realized she needed to get out of there before someone noticed her. But as she tried to creep back toward the service elevator, she bumped into someone coming up behind her. She spun around and found herself face to face with Mrs. Patterson. "Rosa," Mrs. Patterson said calmly, "I think it's time we had a talk." Rosa was so confused she couldn't even speak. Mrs. Patterson was supposed to be downstairs at the gala. And why wasn't she surprised by the federal agents arresting people in her hotel? Mrs. Patterson guided Rosa to a small office near the elevators, away from the action in the hallway. Once they were inside with the door closed, she sat down across from Rosa with a tired smile. "I suppose you're wondering what's going on," Mrs. Patterson said. I don't understand any of this," Rosa admitted. "Mr. Blake is a federal agent?" "You knew?" Mrs. Patterson nodded. "Agent Harrison has been working undercover here for 4 months, investigating an international art theft ring. We've been cooperating with the FBI and DEA to help catch them." Rosa felt like her brain was short-circuiting. "But the photographs I saw, the surveillance pictures, of known criminals," Mrs. Patterson explained. "Agent Harrison was building cases against them. The targets you thought were victims were actually members of the theft ring. What about the threats?" "The photograph of me, the newspaper clipping?" Mrs. Patterson looked confused. "What threats?" Rosa pulled out her phone and showed Mrs. Patterson the threatening text message about her daughter. Mrs. Patterson's expression grew serious as she read it. "Rosa, this didn't come from Agent Harrison or his team. Show me the photograph you mentioned." Rosa pulled the photo from her purse and Mrs. Patterson studied it carefully. "This is very concerning. Agent Harrison needs to see this immediately." They left the office and found Agent Harrison in the hallway, where the last of the suspects was being handcuffed. When Mrs. Patterson showed him the threatening materials Rosa had received, his expression turned grim. "These threats came from the real criminals," he explained to Rosa. "They must have realized you'd seen something and tried to scare you into staying quiet. We had no idea they were targeting hotel staff." Rosa felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. "So you're really one of the good guys?" Agent Harrison smiled for the first time since she'd known him. "I know my cover story wasn't very believable. A businessman who never seemed to do any business, never left his room for normal reasons, never had visitors. But it was necessary to maintain the investigation. The briefcase, the maps, the strange schedule, all part of tracking the theft ring's movements and planning tonight's operation. We knew they were going to target the Marchetti collection during the gala, because the collector would have his guard down in what he thought was a secure environment." Rosa shook her head in amazement. "I thought you were planning to steal $20 million in art." "We were planning to prevent the theft of $20 million in art," Agent Harrison corrected. "And thanks to this operation, we've arrested not just the thieves who came here tonight, but we've also gathered evidence that will help us catch the rest of their organization." Mrs. Patterson put a hand on Rosa's shoulder. "Rosa, I owe you an apology. When Agent Harrison told me you seemed suspicious of him, I should have found a way to reassure you without compromising the operation. I had no idea you were receiving threats. But why didn't you just tell me the truth?" Agent Harrison answered. "The fewer people who knew about the operation, the safer it was for everyone involved. We couldn't risk the information getting back to the criminals." Rosa thought about all the sleepless nights she'd spent worrying, all the fear she'd felt for her daughter's safety. But she also thought about the courage it had taken to investigate what she thought was a crime, and the determination she'd shown to protect innocent people. "Rosa," Agent Harrison said, "what you did was incredibly brave. You saw something suspicious and you didn't ignore it. That kind of vigilance from ordinary citizens is what helps us catch criminals. Even though I was completely wrong about what was happening." "You weren't wrong about sensing danger," Mrs. Patterson said. "Your instincts were absolutely correct. There were dangerous criminals planning a major crime. You just didn't know that we were already on the case." Over the next hour, as Rosa gave her statement to the FBI agents who arrived to process the scene, she learned the full scope of what had been happening. The art theft ring had been operating internationally for years, stealing millions of dollars worth of artwork and antiquities. The Grand Plaza had been chosen as a target because of its reputation for security and discretion, which made wealthy clients feel safe displaying their valuable collections there. Agent Harrison's months of undercover work had finally paid off. Not only had they caught the thieves in the act, but they'd also seized computers and documents that would help them track down the rest of the organization. "What happens now?" Rosa asked as the evening wound down. "Now you go home to your daughter and try to get some sleep," Agent Harrison said with a smile. "And Mrs. Patterson, I think Rosa deserves a significant bonus for her observational skills." As Rosa finally left the hotel that night, she felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She'd spent months thinking she was the only thing standing between criminals and their victims, not knowing that professional law enforcement was already on the case. But in a way, she had been protecting innocent people. Her vigilance and courage had helped expose the real criminals' attempts to intimidate hotel staff, and her determination to do the right thing had impressed federal agents. Rosa realized that sometimes being a hero doesn't mean having all the right information. Sometimes it just means caring enough to pay attention, being brave enough to speak up, and being willing to put yourself at risk to protect others. As she drove home to tell Lucia about the most extraordinary night of her life, Rosa smiled to herself. She'd thought Jonathan Blake was a criminal who needed to be stopped. It turned out he was a hero who needed to be helped. And in the end, that's exactly what she'd done.